It all started with an email, or rather, the lack of one, the promotion email that was supposed to be in my inbox and wasn't. I had been working at Norcom Solutions for nearly 5 years, and everyone knew that this promotion was mine. I had done the overtime, skipped the vacations, even stayed back at the office on a holiday weekend once to finish up a presentation when no one else would. It wasn't just that I was good at my job, it was that I was loyal, probably to a fault. My boss, Mr. Rick Donovan, often reminded me of that fact. "You're a team player, Emma," he would say, patting my shoulder in that patronizing way of his, with a grin that always seemed too big to be genuine. "That's what makes you special." But when they announced the promotion, it wasn't me who got it. It was Ben. Ben from finance, a guy who had been with the company for maybe a year, a guy who had never once worked a night past 6 p.m. I watched him smile his way through the small congratulatory ceremony in the break room, his eyes sparkling as the entire office gathered around to toast his well-earned accomplishment. I felt my fingers clutch around the plastic cup of watered-down champagne as he looked at me, and I swear, just for a second, he looked almost apologetic. My heart dropped into my stomach as I turned my head, my gaze immediately finding Rick Donovan, who stood near the door chatting with HR. He caught my eye, and I raised my glass toward him, hoping for an explanation. Instead, he gave me one of those half smiles and a thumbs up, then turned back to his conversation. That was the first sign. The realization I had never really considered myself someone who gets mad. Sad maybe, disappointed, sure. But mad? I was always the one who tried to make peace, to fix things. But as I walked away from that celebration, if you could even call it that, I felt something change inside me. I had put in the work. I had put in the effort. I was supposed to be next in line. And somehow Ben had swooped in and taken what I'd earned. I needed answers, and I decided to start with Rick. The next morning, I asked if we could speak privately. Rick's face tightened slightly, but he waved me into his office and shut the door. His smile was glued on, a little too tight and a little too dismissive. "Emma, I know why you're here," he began, before I could even sit down. He gestured for me to sit, then sat on the edge of his desk. "The thing is, sometimes these decisions are out of our hands. It's about the direction the company wants to go, about, well, there are metrics we need to consider that you might not be aware of. It's really—" "What metrics?" I interrupted, trying to keep my voice steady. I had a right to know. Rick blinked, caught off guard by my directness. His smile slipped just a little. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be," he said. "Look, I'm going to be honest. You're valued here, Emma, the kind of person who holds the team together. But this promotion, it just wasn't the right time." His words felt like ice water being poured over me. It wasn't the right time. I'd heard those words before, from an old boyfriend, right before he had broken up with me. It was like that, all over again, the implication that somehow I was the problem, that it wasn't about the job or my performance, but about me, Emma, the person. I nodded numbly and left his office, though inside my mind was screaming. That's when I started paying closer attention, and slowly I began to see the cracks. Pieces of the puzzle, it started with small things, a file that went missing just when I needed it, but magically reappeared on Rick's desk. Emails from clients that had supposedly been sent to me but were forwarded days late by Rick himself, with a note that read, "Thought you'd want to see this, but no rush." Then there were the meetings I suddenly stopped being invited to, the side projects Ben was mysteriously assigned, the very projects I had initially proposed. It all made sense. Rick Donovan was deliberately keeping me out of the loop, sabotaging me. I started spending time after hours in the office, going through old emails, paperwork, anything I could find to figure out why. There was something deeper here, and I knew if I pulled the thread hard enough, everything would unravel. The discovery. One Friday night, around 9 p.m., I was scrolling through some archived folders on the company's shared drive, trying to locate the original pitch for a project I'd worked on months before, when I found it. A folder labeled Finance_FY 2023 had somehow found its way into a directory that it clearly didn't belong in. I opened it out of sheer curiosity. Inside, I found a set of invoices, but something about them didn't add up. The billing numbers were higher than I remembered them being. I opened my own saved copy of the invoice, the one I had submitted, and compared it. The numbers were different, not by much, but enough to make a difference. $500 here, $1,000 there. At first, I thought it might be a mistake, but then I checked another invoice, then another. Each one had small but consistent discrepancies. Someone was skimming money off the top. My stomach twisted. I printed copies of everything I found and slipped them into my bag. That weekend, I spent hours at my kitchen table going through every invoice, every receipt I could access. By Sunday morning, I had proof that nearly $200,000 had been siphoned off over the past year. And every single document I checked had one thing in common: Rick Donovan's signature. I knew that Rick had friends within the upper management, people who often attended exclusive golf outings and lavish dinners on the company dime. They were untouchable, or so it seemed. But I also knew that they couldn't protect him if the evidence became too public, too damning to ignore. The confrontation. The next day, I went straight to HR. I knew that going to Rick directly would only give him the chance to cover his tracks. HR listened, their expressions a mix of shock and disbelief as I laid out the paperwork on the table. They promised to escalate it immediately, but the way they glanced at each other made me nervous. What if they swept it under the rug? What if Rick had friends in higher places? I couldn't take that chance. So, I decided to gather more leverage. The following week, I started looking through Rick's office. It wasn't difficult. Rick often left early, and with my access to the office after hours, I had the time I needed. Late one evening, I found what I was looking for: a series of private emails between Rick and Ben. They were careful not to be too specific, but there were enough hints to show they were in on something together. Phrases like, "Make sure the numbers match this time," and "Once we've settled this quarter," were enough for me. That's when I knew Ben wasn't just the lucky new hire, he was in on it. He was Rick's accomplice. I started tailing Ben's projects, discreetly of course. I began to collect even more proof, screenshots of transactions that didn't match reports, emails between him and Rick discussing adjustments to vendor payments. It all painted a very clear picture of their deceit. My obsession with the truth kept me up late many nights with coffee cups littering my living room. But it was worth it. Each piece of evidence I found filled me with a renewed sense of determination. The fallout, I had everything I needed, but I still didn't know if HR would act quickly enough. So, I went one step further. I sent an anonymous tip to a local investigative journalist, someone who had previously exposed corruption at a well-known tech company. I gave him all the information I had, and within 2 days, he emailed me back. He was interested, very interested. He wanted more details, so we met at a quiet cafe one Sunday afternoon. I remember sitting there, my heart pounding, as I handed over copies of the documents. The journalist, Alex, nodded as he skimmed through them, his eyes widening slightly. He promised to follow through, and I knew he meant it. The story broke 2 weeks later. Norcom Solutions was suddenly at the center of a corruption scandal. The headline read, "Local business under fire, fraud and embezzlement at Norcom Solutions exposed." Rick Donovan's name was all over the article, and so was Ben's. They had been siphoning off funds, laundering it through fake vendors and inflating invoices, all under the guise of business expenses. The office was in chaos. There were emergency meetings, hush-hush conversations behind closed doors, and a lot of panicked faces. HR acted fast once the story was public. Rick was terminated immediately, escorted out of the building by security. His face beat red as the entire office watched in silence. Ben didn't fare much better. He wasn't fired on the spot, but he knew his days were numbered. He quit the following Monday, his desk cleaned out before anyone even arrived. People whispered as Ben left. He had come into the office early, hoping to avoid attention, but word spread quickly. I watched from my cubicle as he walked out, his shoulders hunched, carrying a single box of his belongings. He caught my eye, and for a moment, I thought he might say something. Instead, he just shook his head and walked away. As for me, HR suddenly became very interested in my career development. The promotion that had gone to Ben was re-offered to me, along with a significant raise, for my discretion. They framed it as a reward for my loyalty, but I knew it was hush money. They wanted me to stay quiet, to help the company move on from the scandal as quickly as possible, and I took it. Not because I wanted the money, but because I had earned it. Because I deserved to be where I was, and no one, not Rick Donovan or Ben or anyone else, was going to take that from me again. Moving forward, things have changed since then. The office is different, quieter, more cautious. HR sent out a mandatory ethics training schedule, and suddenly everyone was very careful about following protocols. I've noticed some of my coworkers giving me looks, some of admiration, others of suspicion. I've heard whispers, people wondering if I was the one who tipped off the journalist, if I had known all along what Rick was doing. I never confirmed or denied anything. There were a few moments when I wondered if I had done the right thing. Some of my colleagues avoided me, afraid of being associated with someone who had shaken the boat so violently. There were those who thought I was a traitor, that I should have just kept my head down, but those moments of doubt never lasted long. Every time I saw Rick's empty office, I remembered why I had done what I did. I hadn't just fought for myself, I had fought for every person who worked late nights and early mornings, who gave their all, and deserved to be treated fairly. One day, a new hire named Sarah stopped by my office. She was young, bright-eyed, and eager. She wanted advice about navigating office politics. She had heard I was someone worth learning from. I smiled and invited her in, feeling a sense of purpose fill me. Maybe things were finally changing for the better. Rick tried to sabotage my promotion, but in doing so, he made a fatal mistake. He underestimated me. He thought I was just the quiet, loyal employee who would always do as she was told. He thought I wouldn't fight back, but I did, and I won. The lesson. I learned something important through all of this. Loyalty is a double-edged sword. It can be powerful, but it can also be dangerous when placed in the wrong hands. I'd given my loyalty to Rick Donovan for years, believing that it would be rewarded. But loyalty isn't something you owe someone blindly. It's something you give when it's earned, and only to those who deserve it. Now, as I sit in my new office, my nameplate on the door, I know I earned every bit of this. I look out over the rows of cubicles, see the heads bent over their work, and I feel a sense of peace. I made things right, not just for me, but for everyone who was tired of being taken advantage of by people like Rick Donovan. And as for Rick, last I heard, he was being investigated by the authorities. I'm sure he regrets underestimating me now. Sometimes the quiet ones are the ones you really need to watch out for. The journey was longer and more challenging than I ever imagined, but I came out stronger. And if there's one thing I know now, it's that you never let anyone decide your worth for you. You fight for what's yours, no matter how impossible it might seem.